12/28 day of the war. Trump continues to demonstrate more and more harsh rhetoric towards Putin and Russia. Today he said that his sanctions may be much tougher than Biden's, but for now these are all words. We are waiting for the action. Details in a minute. Also, the US president spoke to Zelensky, a Western newspaper, incited that the conversation was good and that America would figure out what she had stopped there and what was not. By the way, there are new details about the installation of postage. This is again the head of the Pentagon, Pete Hegseth, the very alcoholic TV host who Trump appointed to one of the main positions in the world. I hope that this situation will knock out the chair under him, and we will see at this post at least someone who basically understands what an army is, or Marco Rubio will have a fifth position. Ukraine, in the meantime, is not waiting for diplomatic actions, but continues to attack Russian factories and military facilities. This night, 2 airfields were attacked at once. It must be said that the Russian Air Force is doing worse and worse. Ukrainian drones fly to their home in the forming holes and successfully hit the targets time after time. Also, strikes on the oil field have been activated again. I hope this means that there are no more agreements about not hitting them. The Russians have opened a new front in the Kharkiv region. It looks, for the most part, like a distracting one. Having not achieved significant success in 2 months of the offensive, the Russian army is trying to stretch the Ukrainian defense to find a breach in it. Blackbird Group analyst Emil Kastelhelmi believes that the Russian army has spent June in vain, and there was a lot of it, as well as a loss of its personnel. But this did not affect the map. The captured square kilometers do not look impressive to him. Moreover, he emphasizes that there are no serious advancements in the Russian armed forces on the main important fronts. Russian war bloggers uncover the mystery of why the Russian army is doing well with drones, and somewhere there is a catastrophe. According to several Z channels, they are distributed according to the principle of personal communication. The number of drones in the privileged units is unlimited, but the rest have nothing at all. About this and much more in today's fresh summary, which you can support with your like, comments, and subscription to the channel. All these actions help promote the video, especially your subscription. For YouTube algorithms, this is an important indicator. You can also support the channel financially. You can do this on Patreon, the link to which is in the description. And by buying NVPN, this is a means to bypass blockages, which allows you to bypass blockages, watch YouTube at normal speed, use Twitter, Instagram, go to blocked resources. All this will become available to you with NVPN. The state should not decide what to watch, listen, and read. NVPN helps bypass all these blockages and give you the freedom to make a decision about how to use the internet. You can buy it by the link in the description. At the moment, it is legal in Russia to use VPNs and buy VPNs, but it is not prohibited. Well, we move on to what happened in the last 24 hours. The author of the channel B continues to study the situation with the shutdown of the supply of ammunition in Ukraine and the United States. In the next post, he gives a retelling of the NBC News material on this topic. A new main villain has emerged in history, Defense Minister Pete Hegseth. Hegseth stopped the supply of weapons in Ukraine, despite military analysis showing that supplies do not pose a threat to the U.S. combat readiness. This step was taken by the State Department and members of Congress, who demanded an explanation from the Pentagon. Democrat Adam Smith said that he saw data about the supplies of weapons in the American warehouses. There were no indications of a critical shortage. According to Smith, the hypocrisy about the supplies exhausted serves as a cover for the promotion of a notice on the end of aid to Ukraine. The American General Staff also issued a conclusion that the supplies of aid to Ukraine do not exhaust the U.S. supplies below the critical level needed to maintain combat readiness. Turns out that in addition to the well-known stoppage of aid soon after the inauguration of Trump, there was another one in May initiated directly by Hegseth. In both cases, the aid was raised a few days later, but there was also a stoppage after the scandal in the Oval Office. That is, this is already the 4th stoppage of aid to Ukraine and not the 3rd, as it was believed earlier. 3 of them were initiated by Hegseth. A number of congressmen are studying whether these stops are violated by the U.S. legislature and trying to cancel Hegseth's decision. It's time to show Putin that we are serious. It starts with providing Ukraine with all weapons authorized by the Congress to put Putin behind the table of negotiations. Michael McCall said it, a Republican from Texas. In short, the Trump administration has a specific sabotage, but Trump has not yet determined who of the people appointed to him can really be trusted. Let's hope he listens to the general staff, he concludes. Military allies remained in the U.S., although the issue is, of course, in their influence. 17 congressmen and senators collectively addressed the Pentagon head with a demand to resume all supplies of weapons in Ukraine. U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal stated that the Pentagon head, Pete Hegseth, made a dangerous decision at a time when it was necessary to react to Putin's brutal attack on Ukraine. This decision encourages Putin to continue his bloody attacks and atrocities, as well as to refuse serious peace talks. We must support Ukraine, Blumenthal stressed. In a letter to the ECI, it is noted that the decision of the Pentagon also raises doubts among the closest allies of the United States. In the letter, it is emphasized that the stop of the supply of weapons in Ukraine under the pretext of reorientation to other regions is a strategic mistake. Although the administration has repeatedly emphasized the need to redistribute resources in the Indo-Pacific region, congressmen and senators remind that the Russian Federation remains the most relevant and direct threat to the security of the United States and its allies. Last week, President Putin held the largest-scale attack on Ukraine since the beginning of the full-scale war. It is now the worst time to reduce the help to Ukraine, the legislation emphasizes. We urge you to cancel this decision and transfer the rest of the aid already provided within the framework of the President's powers for the transfer of weapons to the amount of $3.8 billion, as well as the remaining $300 million for the Initiative of Security for Ukraine, it says in the letter. The legislator also asks to hold a closed briefing until July 31 and provide a written answer to the following questions. What weapons and ammunition are planned to be delivered to Ukraine were suspended as a result of this decision? Where exactly do these ammunition go? Is further transfer of other ammunition planned? If yes, then where exactly? According to the Ministry of Defense, how long will Ukraine be able to maintain the current pace of use of these ammunition before the run out of supplies? Mr. Minister, the world through force demands from us the use of this force. The struggle of Ukraine for freedom is not a hypothetical issue. It is going right now, and we must be with them, providing the weapons needed for protection, emphasized congressmen and senators. Congress is ready to provide full power and funding to replenish the supply of ammunition to prepare for future conflicts. President Trump informed President of Ukraine Zelensky in a phone conversation on Friday that the United States wants to help Ukraine with air defense against the intensification of Russian attacks. Hegseth, a Ukrainian official and a source familiar with the content of the conversation, reported. During the conversation, Trump issued other reassuring sounds but did not promise anything specific yet. According to two sources, the conversation between Trump and Zelensky lasted about 40 minutes, and the main attention was paid to the needs of Ukraine in air defense. One of the sources reported that Trump is aware of escalation from the Russian side, including air strikes on Ukrainian cities and on the front lines. Trump said that he wanted to help the PVO and check that it was stopped if it was, the source noted. That is, if Trump is not fooled, it is quite possible that he simply does not know that Hegseth and Colby are behind him and will deal with it, if, of course, he does not forget. The Ukrainian official added that Trump and Zelensky agreed to meet the U.S. and Ukraine teams in the near future to discuss the PVO and other supply of weapons. The White House did not respond to the request for comment. Zelensky wrote on Twitter that he talked with Trump about the possibilities in the PVO sphere and that they agreed on joint work to strengthen the protection of our sky. We in Ukraine are grateful for all the support you have given. It helps us to protect life, to protect freedom and independence. We have achieved a lot together with America and support all efforts to stop the killing and the restoration of a just, strong, and worthy world. We need a noble agreement about the world, Zelensky wrote. Meanwhile, at the concert in Germany, Friedrich Merz discussed with Trump the delivery of the PVO Patriot system to Ukraine, said Spiegel. Merz discussed the situation in Ukraine on the phone with U.S. President Donald Trump, including the need to strengthen the air defense of the country, said Spiegel with a link to his sources. According to the publication, Trump did not give Merz any promises. A lead representative of the German government, Stefan Cornelius, told journalists that in Berlin there are intensive negotiations with Washington about the delivery of the PVO system to Ukraine. In particular, Germany considers the possibility of buying weapons from the U.S. to then deliver it to Ukraine. In general, there is no specifics here. Let me remind you that Trump is still waiting not only for the delivery of Patriots, but at least for the sending of a rocket for them, which is already being sprayed in Poland. And again, right before the conclusion, Trump gave a comment, again, quite reassuring. We helped and we will continue to help. The situation is quite complicated. Let's see what happens next. I have already told you that I was very unhappy with the conversation with President Putin, said Trump to the journalist. Also, Trump again said that he's more strict with the Russian Federation than with Iran, which he bombed. And what did he say to Putin about the sanctions during their last conversation? Here is the direct speech of Trump. We talked a lot about the sanctions. I would not say that he is happy. Yes, he managed to cope with them, but these were the sanctions of Biden. And mine are pretty tough. Perhaps they will be introduced. He knows this. He is a professional, said Trump. Let's see where this all leads. The words are correct. Actions, unfortunately, are still zero. China's foreign minister, Wang Yi, told the main diplomat of the European Union, Kai Kalos, that Beijing cannot allow Russia's defeat in the war against Ukraine, as it would allow the U.S. to focus its attention on China, said a CNN source familiar with the outcome of the negotiations. Several sources of the South China Morning Post have also told about this. According to the publication, Wang Yi made his statement during a 4-hour meeting with the head of the foreign ministry of the EU, Kai Kalos, next to Brussels. During the conversation, a wide range of issues were discussed, from cybersecurity and rare metals to the trade imbalance of the situation around Taiwan and the Middle East. This was a tough but respectable decision, writes CNN. The statement of Wang Yi indicates that Beijing might have preferred a prolonged war in Ukraine, which would have distracted the United States from the confrontation with China. Said the CNN source. These words confirm the opinion of critics of Chinese politics, who believe that in fact, for China, the war in Ukraine has a much greater geopolitical value. And he says the official claim of neutrality, says the TV channel. At the same time, Wang Yi denies the accusation that China is providing Russia with material, financial, or military aid in the war, according to the sources of the South China Morning Post. In other words, if Beijing had really helped, the war in Ukraine would have ended a long time ago. During a 4-hour conversation, Wang Yi, as the South China Morning Post writes, taught Carlos a few history lessons and read a lecture. How did these historians who like to read lectures do? Well, what can they do? Several interlocutors, a number of officials, believe that Wang Yi taught Carlos, who has been doing his post only since the end of last year, a real policy lesson. According to sources, Beijing believes that Washington will soon pay all its attention to the East. According to the Chinese statement, Carlos said that there's no fundamental conflict of interest between China and the US, and that the parties have a wide common base for cooperation. By the way, I personally agree with this. The other thing is whether China is ready to give up the support of the enemies of the European Union, in particular Russia, which actively attacks the countries of the European Union directly. At a press conference on Friday, the press secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mao Ning, answering the question about the content of the meeting, confirmed the previously announced official position of China on the war in Ukraine. The position of China on the Ukrainian crisis is objective and consistent. Negotiations on the ceasefire and peace. There is no long-term crisis in Ukraine in the interests of anyone. In fact, China does not need to actively help Russia. It is enough to close our eyes on the supply of Chinese companies with products of close military use, which is apparently being done. Investigators from the Security Service of Ukraine discovered components made in the Ukrainian Special Service in the Russian version of the Shahed UAV, Jaren. This is evidenced by the marking of the company of the manufacturer Suzhou Accord Precision Manufacturing Co. Limited on the corresponding details. As we can see, the guys don't care at all. These components in particular, the fasteners for the launch catapult, were taken from UAVs, which the Russian occupants attacked the Ukrainian capital on the night of July 3-4. This is not the only Chinese component in the Russian geraniums. Shaheds are assembled in Russia from Chinese parts, which are directly purchased, including from major Chinese manufacturers. Insider found out that the deliveries cover a significant share of components for kamikaze drones, starting with the engines and ending with the carbon fiber from which the wings of the aircraft are made. That is, the purchase of spare parts in China is essentially the only contribution of Russian engineers to localization of unmanned vehicles. Some of the parts were disguised as snowmobiles, and one of the companies was designed for students. And without self-irony, the supplier of parts for the Shaheds named their companies with part names Drake and Morgan. You can get more details about the insider investigation on their website, but in general, you can immediately say that this is a consequence of degradation of the sanction policy under Trump. New American sanctions are not introduced, the observation of the old is not followed, and there is no hope for the Europeans, because they clearly do not want to spoil the relationship with the only remaining more or less reliable large-scale trading port. In the face of China, since neither Russia nor the United States does not have to be considered reliable, not because China is some kind of good, but because China from these three is the only one who does not take any crazy actions that contradict the entire previous policy. The main question, of course, is what is, from the point of view of China, a defeat of Russia. For Putin, now a defeat would be a ceasefire along the line of contact with the guarantee of security for Ukraine. On the other hand, it is not clear why for China this would be an unfavorable outcome. Moreover, in this case, Russia remains in international isolation, which means depending on Beijing. The other thing is that, let's say, such an option of defeating Russia as the defeat of the Russian army, the exit of the Ukrainian border in 1991, and the next internal instability of the northern neighbor is clearly undesirable for China, at least because it will convince the West that the forceful restraining of the ambitions of authoritarian regimes works. However, the current trends make such a scenario in this historical segment unlikely. Therefore, China does not need to do anything to prevent it. Simply enough, it does not interfere with its companies to sell Russia the products of military use. But the interesting reaction of the Z community to this idea of a Chinese representative, for example, the post of the Z channel of Senior Ed, which gathered together the perception of various military bloggers in the position of the KNR. Here's what he writes. When the foreign minister of China says that the defeat of Russia in the conflict with NATO is not in the interests of China, and moreover, it is not in his interest to change the focus of attention of the United States from Europe to China, it must be understood exactly as it is written. In the interests of China, the delay of the conflict we must not lose. Because in this case we can be allies of the United States and NATO, as it happened with Russia after the Russian-Japanese War, when the Russian Empire, having lost the war to the British proxies, that's crazy, but okay, turned out to be an alliance with France and Britain against Germany. But we must not win too quickly, because then the United States will just wash its hands, throw Europe to feed the bear, and turn against the KPR with all its capabilities. Therefore, China will trade electronics and components of drones both with us and with the US and with Ukraine, and at the same time will limit our capabilities, for example, example, refusing Russia to access the Chinese financial market and with any opportunity pushing the price for our resources. Medium for itself. This needs to be realized not too much by formulas about strategic partnership and the turn to the East. Everything has its price, including China's support, and we pay this price with a long war, he writes. In general, despite the absolutely crazy assessment of the Russian-Chinese war,
базово, я думаю, это понимание наиболее близко к объективной реальности. То есть я думаю, что Китай действительно не хочет и победы России, и поражения России. Нынешняя ситуация для Китая довольно удобна. Все покупают у Китая.
at the same time, all the attention related to the sanctions pressure and all the rest is devoted to Russia, not China. And this puts China in a good situation, in a good position, especially considering that China itself has economic problems, including the collapse of the absolute development market. The Chinese economy is slowing down, but let the Chinese tell you about it. A separate story, a separate world. China is an insanely interesting country. China is now in an insanely interesting position. The Chinese economic miracle shows its other side, but again, this is better for professionals. For us, the main thing is that, yes, China is really interested in making the conflict last as long as possible, thereby distracting attention from China itself. Well, as you can see, geopolitics is such an ungrateful and not very pleasant thing. Therefore, the main thing that must be understood here, and the main conclusion that we must make with you for ourselves, is that we can help those who we can help. That is, Ukrainian-specific brigades in their specific supply in order for them to be able to stop Russian occupiers and protect their country of relatives and loved ones. Therefore, we continue to assemble 3 brigades at once. This is such a combo bank which, in fact, will allow to provide the needs of these 3 brigades, and here is one of them. We are military personnel who perform tasks in the Kherson direction. We ask Michael and his audience to help with the purchase of an engine for a tank to perform combat tasks. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Here is a QR code for Monobank. In the description, a link to Monobank, PayPal, USDT, TRC20, Bitcoin. In general, as it is convenient for you, let's help the Ukrainian defenders together. Yesterday, a lot of people helped the assembly. Thank you very much. I hope that in the near future we will be able to close it with you, although it is quite large. Of course, I also participated in the assembly, and I will also participate. The only thing I will remind you of is that if you are in Russia, then you do not need to participate in this assembly in any other for Ukrainian military, because this is a criminal offense. And if you are an adequate person in Russia who understands that you need to donate to the Soviet Union and that this is a victim who needs to help fight the aggressor, it's great. There should be more people with this understanding, and they should remain free. All the others who have the opportunity to safely help the Ukrainian troops, in my opinion, can and should do this in case, again, of the availability of opportunities. Well, we're moving on. The Office of the President of France reported that on July 10, President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer will hold a meeting of the so-called coalition of the desired groups of Western countries, which allowed them to be ready to send their peacekeeping troops to Ukraine in the event of a truce. From July 8 to 10, Macron will be in Great Britain with a state visit. He will also address the parliament of the country and meet with King Charles. During the trip, Starmer and Macron will also hold a meeting on the issue of support for Ukraine with other European leaders, including Chancellor of Germany Friedrich Merz and Italian Prime Minister Giorgio Meloni, as well as with Vladimir Zelensky, said the Elysian Palace. It is expected that Starmer and Macron will lead a meeting in London, and some other leaders will join them via video communication. The administration of the President of France reports that the participants of the summit will also discuss sending force of assurance to Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire. They will also talk about how to pressure Russia so that it agrees to ceasefire without any preconditions, which it repeatedly rejected. European leaders began to speak actively about the coalition of those who wish to come to the White House of Donald Trump and the agreement of Ukraine to cease fire. However, sending European peacekeepers to Ukraine will probably be impossible without the agreement of Russia, which repeatedly made it clear that such a scenario is unacceptable. In addition, the U.S. needs support for the successful work of the coalition of those who wish to come to the White House, but the Trump administration has not yet expressed readiness to provide its military resources for this mission. It seems to me that Macron is trying to increase its own importance here again. As I said above, the problems that stood in the way of the forces of assurance did not go anywhere. Russia directly calls any import of foreign troops unacceptable, and the USA is not ready to promise support to Europeans, first of all, in the PVO. Of course, I will be mistaken, but so far nothing says that these plans have become at least a little closer to reality. Moscow violates the Convention on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in War in Ukraine. The military intelligence of the Netherlands and Germany has officially declared this. It's claimed that the Russian army uses not only tear gas, but more dangerous substances, for example, chlorpyrene, which can be fatal. According to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, chemical weapons were used in Russia in more than 9,000 attacks. 3 people were killed as a result of the direct impact of chemical weapons. Russia also accused Ukraine of using this method, but did not provide any data. At the same time, in October 1924, the neo-Nazi unit Rusich, which ruled over the country of Russia, published the footage of the use of chemical weapons against Ukraine, signing a lawsuit against the Ukrainian supporters of Vagami and chlorpyrene. Also, the use of chemical weapons by the Russian side was actually recognized by the state channel Russia Today. Officially, the Kremlin rejects accusations of using poisonous substances. In general, chemical weapons came out of fashion after the First World War not only because it was terrible, but also because it was not super effective compared to conventional artillery. However, the Russians have found their niche for chemical weapons. They throw grenades with greenhouse gas and chlorpyrene on the dugouts and other shelters, forcing Ukrainian fighters to get out of there under the blows of drones with conventional ammunition. The tactics of the workers are used quite broadly because it has no consequences for Russia. The world community does not care about the norms and rules that it has established itself. That is why I always say that these international norms and rules of war are limited exclusively to the victim, because the aggressor does not give a f***ck about it. Do I urge Ukraine to use such methods themselves, especially since they are effective? Rather, no, because Ukraine will figure out what to do with them. But if Ukraine uses them, then I have nothing against it. Because, again, I think that an incredibly wrong approach is when only the victim is restrained and the aggressor is not restrained in any way. Last night, a military airdrome Engels was attacked near Saratov. Eyewitnesses wrote about the work of the PVO EREP. Also under attack was the airdrome Borisoglovsky near Voronezh. Local residents reported about the explosions. NASA satellites recorded a fire near the airdrome. This blow was confirmed at the General Staff of Ukraine. On July 5, units of the Special Operations Forces, together with other components of the Defense Force, struck the Borisoglovsk-Voronezh region airdrome, reports the General Staff. This airdrome is the base of enemy Su-34, Su-35s, and Su-30SM aircraft. They were hit with a class of controlled air bombs, training aircraft, and probably other aircraft. The results of the strikes are clarified, they write, but in Cheboksary, drones hit an industrial object. The public writes that the police, after the attack, blocked the entrance to the NIR Progress territory, which produces antennas protecting Russian drones from Ukrainian RAPs. In general, it seems to me such a tendency has already been pointed out that the Russian PVO is getting worse and worse. That is, Ukraine does not use some incredible amount of BPA, but about the same time at a time. But it is possible to strike more and more objects more effectively. Factories arise, just stop, headquarters are amazed, and so on. I think it makes sense for us to talk about this separately. In fact, what is happening now, what happened to the Russian air defense, why Ukraine manages to do all this, and what results it can lead to. Ukrainian forces of unmanned systems have also read about strikes on another important link in the production of Shaheds. In conjunction with the recent strike on the Kupol plant in Zhevskoy, which produces microchips for drones and ready-made BPAs, the Ukrainian strategy to strike on archers, not on arrows, is being drawn to reduce the number of future strikes and allow the PVO forces to cope with them. Oh, this is what was written in the Forces of Unmanned Systems. Operators of 14 separate remnants of the Forces of Unmanned Systems struck on the AOC, the FNMC, the Science and Research Institute of Applied Chemistry in the city of Sergiy Posad, the Moscow region, more than 500 km from the state border of Ukraine. This enterprise is part of the Rostec company. It is under international sanctions for participation in the military programs of the Russian Federation. It specializes in the development and production of more than 500 types of special pyrotechnic devices for rocket and space artillery systems. In particular, it produces thermobaric combat units for kamikaze drones such as the Shahed. In the target area, a BPA hit is recorded which caused a fire and a strong haze. The electric substation which provided the object with electric energy is also known for the defeat. Data from Deep Strike, they are clarifying, they say. The defeat of the substation was confirmed by Ivasin of the project Cyberbarashno. It was not the only attack on the objects of the Russian VPK. Yesterday morning, the Ukrainian strike UAVs dug up an optics mechanical plant in the city of Ozov in the Rostov region. Video recordings and messages in social networks testify to this. The footage shows the flight and pickup of UAVs of the aircraft type towards the Enterprise with subsequent explosions and smoke. One drone had a plan of a Shahed-like structure with a delta-shaped scheme. The social networks immediately began to write that the Azov optical mechanical plant was hit. Later, the sources of the STRIFMCSRF confirmed that at least 10 UAVs or fragments of them fell on the territory of the Enterprise. The consequences are not yet known. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation stated that on the night of July 4, the PVO forces allegedly shot down 26 UAVs over the Rostov region. Drones with a delta-shaped scheme are quite common, however, they are not frequently used among the attackers of Russia. Therefore, it is not known what kind of model it is at the moment. Most likely, it is those analogies of the Shahed, which are already made in Ukraine. The Azov optical mechanical plant, which is part of the Russian corporation Tactical Rocket Weaponry, manufactures electronic systems for high-precision artillery, rocket and anti-tank weapons, as well as radar heads for self-guided tactical guided missiles. In addition, the Enterprise produces optical mechanical optical electron products, as well as products for the airspace complex of the aggressor country. This plant, which works for the needs of the Russian defense, is under the sanctions of the USA, Canada, Switzerland, the European Union, New Zealand, and Ukraine. The sources of Astras in the emergency services of Udmurtia have confirmed the attack on the oil base Horizon of the Rosserva in the village of Borak on July 3. According to sources, one drone was caught in a fence and fell on a concrete slab. The second one got into one of the reservoirs with oil products, damaging its hull. The employees of the oil base and the residents of nearby houses, about 30 people, were evacuated. It was possible without the victims. The security of the object, according to this master, is now engaged in military service. On the eve of the attack in the village of Borak, the eyewitnesses reported that the authorities did not reveal the settlement, which was hit. The base, as they write in the Kambarsk regional publications, was designed as a reservoir park to store oil. It is finally clear that the stupid moratorium on the strikes on the Russian oil and gas industry has been cancelled. And this is good. Ukraine should choose for what objects to strike, because Russia definitely does not connect itself with any agreements on this account. On June 30, during the missile strike of the Ukrainian Defense Forces at the command post of the 8th General Army of Russia in Donetsk, not only the commander, but also the commander-in-chief of this army was liquidated. Asinter Necromancer reported on this, paying attention to the necrology of the published administration of the Parabel region of the Tomsk region, where the occupant was born. It is indicated that the Colonel Vasily Fyodorovich Skernevsky was liquidated. He graduated from the Tomsk Higher Military School of Communication and the Faculty of Communication at the Military University. From April 2016 to October 2018, the occupant served at the Central Headquarters of Communication of the Internal Troops of the Russian Federation as the commander of the military unit. He served on various positions until, as the head of communication, the regiment joined the armed aggression against Ukraine in 1922 in the Kiev direction. In total, according to the channel of the spy files, 8 people were killed because of a blow to the headquarters, so there is still space for interesting necrology. In the forces of defense, they are not going to stop at what they have achieved, and the General Staff of the OSU has reported on a new blow to the Russian headquarters in Donetsk. On July 3, the Air Force of the OSU, for the second time this week, successfully struck the command post of the 8th General Army of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, the Ukrainian military reported. In addition, our defenders struck the command post of the 20th Rifle Division of Russian Armed Forces at the time of the occupied territory of the Donetsk region. The loss of the enemy is clarified. Our constant high-precision strikes significantly reduce the ability of the enemy to plan and carry out operations in the region. All efforts aimed at continuing the occupation of the sovereign territory of Ukraine will be met with an accurate return payment and will be expensively paid off to the enemy, the General Staff assures. Well, we are waiting for new necrologues on Russian officers. There are also details about the recent death of Ukrainian officers of the 110th Brigade. Fortunately, there are no new casualties, but it became known that the cause of their death was a violation of the rules of information security, tells the specialist in the field of communications Sergei Flash Bezkresnov. The cambric of the 110th Brigade died during a meeting in which the enemy struck with a candela, says Flash. The problem is that this event was discussed in advance in a group where there were several hundred participants. How the information got to the Russians is no longer so important. Perhaps a virus, perhaps someone told the wrong thing, maybe someone lost their phone. Some teams and commanders immediately began to write orders to ban the signal WhatsApp and switch from personal to other messengers, but the problem cannot be solved. No orders can be cancelled by governmental communications and messengers, they are effective. For people, you need to deliver something else. If there is at least one person in the group that you do not know personally and are not sure that the phone is really his, consider that the group is read by the Russians. Even when writing one-on-one, delete all important messages immediately after reading. The military unit group should have an administrator assigned, who monitors each participant and his phone every day. If such a person is not assigned, the group from the very beginning is dangerous. Only such an administrator can add new participants. The groups do not discuss important military events or actions, do not publish the coordinates of events and elections, do not send passwords and keys. This information is delivered individually. Do not leave your personal phone unattended. Always install the password at the entrance. If you lose your phone, immediately inform the administrator. The group writes a flash, and these are very reasonable measures of precaution. And in the age of information wars, indispensable to all of us, and not only to the military, we need to get used to the idea, then the ill-intentioned strive to own our data, and we need to take measures to protect them. First of all, this, of course, concerns the military, to which this is a question of literally life and death. So I bring the opinion of the flash to you. If the Ukrainian military is watching me, please take it to the news. The deep state records progress of Russian armed forces in the area of Fedorovka and Podobnaya in the South Donetsk direction, which remains the most dangerous for the defense of Ukraine. Particularly, if you look at the map, it can be seen that the threat of the formation of a pocket for the Ukrainian forces with the peaceful center of the village has only increased. It remains to be hoped that this situation will be seen in the General Staff of the Soviet Union and in the local command, and will take measures to withdraw soldiers from a potentially dangerous area. Dev State confirmed the occupation of the villages of Milovoy and Struivka in the Kharkiv border and warns about the possible opening of another front by the Russians, whose reserves are almost nowhere to be taken. This is what the analysts write. After a relatively long stormy action, the Russians were able to suddenly occupy the settlement of Milovoy and numerous forest strips to the west and south of the village. These actions are aimed at supporting the offensive of the enemy troops on the west bank of the river Oskol. It is expected to hit Balagovka or Odrodnoy in the next few days to expand the area of pressure along the Oskol River. On the one hand, there has been no large-scale offensive in the Milovov region, but on the other hand, there is a lost territory, and the Russians are trying to attack Ambarnaya and Zarubinka on the rise. In general, it is not a secret that the main areas where the reserves are directed are completely different directions. So the units in this operational tactical zone are forced to find new forces literally out of nothing, while the enemy is slowing down, but is increasing the efforts of the deep state. It remains to hope that it will not be possible to quickly increase the tempo of the Russian offensive, and the defense force will, in the meantime, release reserves after stabilizing in some other direction. In the Russian Ministry of Defense, the capture of the village is thought to have been predicted by almost the very Kostyantynivka, to the southwest of the stupas. This immediately seemed very strange, because even the Zelensky claim that in the stupas there are still fierce battles, and the Ukrainians hold the southern part of the village. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, this information is refuted by the Ukrainian military and the author of the Telegram channel officer. The Russians are telling a fairy tale as if they managed to break through the stupas to the pre-spread in the Chasivoyarsk direction, writes Tun. According to the verified information, it can be stated that this is a F***CK, says the officer. His version corresponds much more to what we know about the situation in this direction. Russian troops are really trying to break through to Kostyantynivka, south of Chasivoyarsk, but in recent months, apparently, they have not really come close to their goal. Yesterday, I brought you the data from the Blackbird Group community about the pace of the Russian offensive in Ukraine, which is somewhat different from the data of the deep state. Now, one of the analysts in the community, Emil Kastelhelmi, whom you should know well, presented, in my opinion, a rather interesting and objective analysis of the events on the front in June. I suggest you get acquainted with him. According to our data, he writes to the Russians, they did not speed up their offensive in June, Kastelhelmi writes. The pace cannot be called slow according to the standards of the current war, I add to myself, but most of the Russian invasions last month occurred in less important areas. It can be argued that Russia mainly spent June in vain without achieving significant success. The situation for Ukraine is far from good, but it could be worse. The conflict between Pokrovsk and Kostyantynivka is still a problem, but in June it did not expand rapidly. In the Romsky region it was also stabilized. The worst scenarios have not yet been implemented, at least at the moment. Significant part of Russian advancements occurred to the south of Pokrovsk, where they are moving to the administrative borders of the Donetsk region. The exit of the Dnipropetrovsk region does not change the general picture, despite the active Russian propaganda on this issue, it fixes. The problem is still possible on the horizon. The summer offensive continues and the sad trend is obvious. Ukraine is losing territory and Russia is capturing it. It is difficult to imagine how this can be changed in the current political realities. Kastelhelmi summed up, and I probably agree with him to some extent, because now the goal of the defense force is not to start some kind of counteroffensive, but to drag the Russian troops to such an extent that they would lose the ability to attack. Putin would be convinced that it would be impossible to achieve his goals by military means. The essence of this strategy lies in the creation of a line of drones designed to cause maximum losses to the advancing Russians. You can learn more about what it is and how it should work from my video on the topic. This does not mean that we will no longer see local counterattacks. It may be useful to take a more favorable position, which the Russians will try to fight off with great losses. In general, the tendency of the next few months seems to me that Putin will continue to kill the Russian army and the economy, capturing several hundred square kilometers per month, until, I hope, it will not be stopped completely. Another stage of exchange of prisoners of war took place within the framework of the Istanbul agreements. As always, the number of exchanges has not been announced recently. Vladimir Zelensky wrote about the return of the Ukrainian wars as follows. Our people are at home. Most of them have been in the Russian captivity since 2022. Our defenders who defended Ukraine in various regions of Donetsk and Mariupol, Lugansk, Kharkiv, Kherson are returning. These are the soldiers of the armed forces, the National Guard, the State Border Service, the State Special Service, the Transport Service, as well as the civilian ones. The exchanges must continue, and I thank everyone who provides this to the goal of Ukraine to free all our people from the Russian captivity. Thank you to everyone who helps to do this. I sincerely thank the return of the defenders of Ukraine from captivity. It is a great joy, first of all, for their relatives and loved ones. Z channels told us how the Russian army supplies drones. It turns out that the population of the defense is mainly taken out by several elite units. Favorite members of the command are simple drone operators, members of the lineup regiments and brigades, even sitting on a hungry pie, picking up volunteers or taking a bath, as the Zeman joke, on their own. Like, their own. The conversation was started by the military corps of Andrei Filatov a few days ago. KPI writes that the method becomes the coolest, he wrote. There are units, the majority, who have a limit of 5 pieces per week for a battalion, and there are units who are brought by trucks. The question is, who will be in the videos of paid patriots, handsome guys, and who are losers? In general, the loser is the army of loss. I remind you, it is the same for the men. When they write something discrediting the Russian army, then they are jokingly accused that in fact this is happening in loss and everything is fine with us. Without close communication, Filatov continues to form a team of infantry and special forces, as well as, with the retreat of the infantry and high-tech, high losses of the personal composition are not justified. Yesterday, Filatov gave a specific example of the conditions in which it is necessary to work as a Russian pilot, writing the following. He writes about the elite. The most important threat now is the BPA of the enemy. In one direction, the guy finds an antenna and flies into the PV to kill the antenna. I believe that it is necessary to kill the calculation of what the guy said many times. The answer is that we have 3 FPVs per week. The antenna of the Ukrainians will be replaced in half an hour. Our infantry is being disassembled by 2 or 3 vases per person. The warehouses are filled, the vases are given out by the elite, by the KAMAZs, the rest are not. That's how he writes. The author of channel UBZH 08, the main one, paid attention to Filatov post. Actually, as I said, he writes that this is the domestic approach in management, instead of scaling into all. Units of the BPA regiments and brigades, a small number of miracle. Heroes with unlimited support is created. And the guys really give a result, but the rest are sitting without resources. Where are the shells? Remember, we go through this again for several military years. Oh yes, I forgot to add in the comments above, writes further, shelter number 8, that unlimited supply of the miracle of the baguetters, ignoring requests of ordinary BPA units and bringing to the fact that the warehouses are clogged. Unfortunately, friends, through volunteers and through our assemblies, supply operators with drones, replacing state structures more than 80%. Plus, of course, the operators themselves from the non-elite BPA units are fighting for their own. The conversation on supplies caused a rather lively response. BPA number 8 brings a message from one of the Russian tankers from an ordinary non-elite unit. Trucks for drones, tools and consumables for our own and from kind people, writes the interviewee of this channel. The laboratory contains cash from the soldiers, and due to the shortage of supplies, a collection of trophies has been established. One MAG trophy copter served the enemy an unknown amount of time, then it was selected by hours. It flies for hours to this day, although it was shot down by the enemy at least 5 times, and every time it was restored. The military department sends 20 drones per month to this part. For comparison, the limit of the cost of FPV in our region is 5 kamikaze per day. However, this is the last year's limit, and now it has become worse. Just such an inequality between the unmanned units is being tried to avoid in Ukraine, unifying the supply of drones and components and leading a transparent system of bonuses. Having more experience in using full-fledged BPA units, the forces of defense have already realized that it is inefficient to transfer elite units across the front, and it is best for the entire front to be saturated with drones and skillful operators, so that all units are elite. And will Russian armed forces come to this? It is not known. We will hope that never. The analysts of the Borspedin project have calculated that in June, the Russians have confirmed they lost 153 units of armored vehicles, which is 30% less than in May. At the same time, in May, the losses were 30% less than in April. The community does not take into account the losses of cars, motorcycles, and other auxiliary junk, clarifies the Ukrainian channel Infectum in its retelling and research. At the moment, this is the lowest indicator for the entire time of observation. However, with the 14 confirmed losses in aviation, June has become the most profitable month in this component, mostly the indicator of the results of the Operation SBU Spider. The 25th year is now in a free fall if you look at the graph. Most likely, in the next month, we will see new record minimums of losses in Russian equipment. Among all regions, the Donetsk region is now completely dominated as a region. Where the Russians lose equipment, 80 units or 52% of all losses. The rest of the regions have 10+ units of losses or even less, except for the Kursk region with a score of 15. On my part, I cannot but note that the fixed losses of Russian equipment are less than the estimates of its production and recovery from the warehouses. It is necessary to assume that somewhere at the highest level a decision has been made to consciously reduce the use of armored vehicles in Ukraine and save it for some future operation, be it in Ukraine or, most likely, in Europe. Moreover, such a chance will not be presented in the near future if the remains of the restored vehicles in the current offensive are burned down. Then, the park of armor and, what is no less important, its reserves will have to be restored over the years, if not decades. Analyst Tatargami and his group Front Intelligence Insight decided to calculate how many foreign mercenaries actually managed to recruit into the Russian army. They used leaked data about a set of foreign contractors, as well as internal documents of the Russian brigades and regiments. A small group of foreigners is fighting in their composition by force before the platoon. Therefore, analysts believe that the assessment of CNN and 5,000 recruited Cubans and 15,000 fingers does not correspond to reality. They themselves estimate that in the 23-24 years in the Russian army, they tried to recruit up to 500 Cubans, and the total number of foreigners fighting in Russian armed forces is from 4,660 to 8,000 people. This is less than a quarter of the set of Russian contractors in 1 month. They are glad that in fact there are not so many idiots in the countries of the global south leading to Russian propaganda. Ukrainian journalist Yuri Budisov brings another video demonstrating that Russian fighters are treated like cattle. They beat up a soldier on him with sticks and say that it is for the fact that he dared to turn to the prosecutor's office with a complaint about the actions of the commander. The commander was hit because of you. It's a hello from Shorakas. Well, that's what happens when they go and complain to the prosecutor. Here we are with them. Come on, Sedoy, pick him up. Here she is, who gives up everything, and so it will be with. Everyone, according to Budisov, the event takes place in the 255th Anti-Tank Regiment, but this is possible in absolutely any Russian unit, in which, if I note, such videos are not accidentally uploaded. The fighters themselves report that they are being punished for threatening other fellow servicemen, so that it would not be in vain to complain to the prosecutor's office in this case. Regular section veterans are not needed, or I did not send you there. Director of the federal TV channel Evgeny Gubko told the story of a participant who was seriously wounded at the front. After returning home, he tried to get a job as a truck driver, but he met with rejections everywhere. Having found out about his status as a member of the SVO, the workers refused without an explanation. They don't take it, and he says, I understood only on the third refusal that it turns out that I don't take it from the SVO. When you tell the whole truth, if I said, I just hid an elementary thing that I have it there, I would be upset. Another story was told by the SVO participant Oleg Bogdanovich with the nickname Dakat. He reported that a fellow soldier with the nickname Patapich went through a hard battle and received 3 shards in his head. Now he has no job, according to him. Before that, he was working at an enterprise where he faced extremely hard conditions. They paid little, their salary was delayed. Well, yes, he was thrown out. He said, I'm like a slave to you, I was given 2,000 rubles for food or cigarettes. Bogdanovich also noted that many fighters still have not received the approval of the veteran of combat actions. They are refused help everywhere, they do not dare to contact the higher station. I just do not believe that the officials really helped. The authors of the channel do not wait for good news, remind that they have already reported that the fighters who returned from the front are faced with the refusal of employment. Only because they are their participants. More often, they have to hide their participation in combat actions just to find a job, so the Russian military will die on the front and become colleagues. And when they return home, if they still manage to survive, not only they don't need their relatives, but also the whole society. In the end, they manage to get in and kill other people, beep and rob. Keep this in mind and run from the Russian army. And don't come any closer to it if you are still far away from it. Michael Nacke was with you, and see you soon. All the best. Bye.